Morning, everyone. Happy Freedom Day, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's politics editor, head of politics head, editor, Jason Beattie.
Morning, Susie.
Yes, we got there in the end. Now we're going to take you through the best stories of the day, the most interesting things that you're going to want to know the best about. And through it all, we want you to ask us your questions. So dig into the comments and tell us what you think about Jennifer Arcuri and Boris Johnson and whether or not we're getting our freedom this weekend. And also we've got some stuff about the Labour reshuffle, so stay tuned for that. Now, what have we got then? Well, the Mirror has devoted five pages, including the front, to the second day of its reporting on Jennifer Arcuri's long suspected and long denied affair with Boris Johnson. Now, yesterday it told us they were sexting while on taxpayer-funded trade trips when he was Mayor of London. And today she reveals they had sex on the marital sofa and she missed his wife coming home by 10 minutes. If she hadn't, of course, the police might have been called to a Boris bus stop a bit sooner than they actually were. Now, Jason, we're past the age when politicians having extramarital affairs was a resignation matter. Now, our public morality is more accepting of these things these days as private foibles. So why does it matter? Why do we care?
Well, that actually is a really good question to start with. It appears to be there's, I think, some double standards here. So imagine just for a second if this wasn't Boris Johnson, but actually a senior Labour politician who was Mayor of London at the time and was having affairs. And I think the outcry and the outrage would have been off the scale in terms of decibels. But somehow it seems to be kind of one rule for them and one rule for anybody else, you know. And the kind of Tory party of kind of, you know, supposed to be the party of family values, except when it comes to their own. And then they just turn a blind eye and go, oh, it's fine. You know, it's only just Boris. It doesn't really matter.
It's other people's families that need to have values, not Tory families.
Yeah. So I was just kind of, you know, looking up and reading about, you know, Ian Duncan Smith, a former Tory leader who kind of, you know, kind of 10 years ago was writing kind of articles about how awful it was that we had, you know, family breakdown and separations and how awful it was for children, and these things weren't talked about enough.
Socially damaging.
Yes, you know, so, you know, kind of, you know, if you know, somebody who kind of on a council estate, you know, has an affair and, you know, their family breaks up as a result, they're kind of feckless, obviously. But if it's, you know, Boris Johnson doing it, then it doesn't really matter because he's a Tory and, you know, it's just something he does.
Yeah, it's a bit unreasonable, isn't it? Now, there's some stuff here that's worth unpacking. If we can have the original slide back, please, the front page, you'll see on the background there, as she's putting a very, very sly face, it has to be said, while taking a selfie of herself in Boris Johnson's marital kitchen. Will you just look at the man's tap? The tap in the background there is the most ridiculous example of overcompensation I think I've ever seen. Outside of a catering institution, no one needs a hose pipe in the kitchen, anybody. And she also reveals in here that she texted him, oh, hang on a minute, what's just so Shell, what have you said? It's not just about sex and morals. People need to look deeper and see how unethical it is mixing business with pleasure when the pleasure involves grants and trips paid up with taxpayers' money. Quite right, Shell's other stuff afoot here. So while it's, how can I put it? It's sort of entertaining in a nasty way to hear her stories, Jason, about how she was cooking his cheesy pasta dinner at his wife's cooker, and she took off her stockings and left them on the kitchen island and texted him when she left to say, you might want to put my stockings in the bin. I mean, first off, who does that? Who does that? Never mind in the house where you know your boyfriend's wife lives and is coming home, but who takes their stockings off while they're cooking and leaves them just sitting there while you're cooking? Foul, Jennifer. But it's the blackmail, isn't it? The potential for blackmail. It's what it shows us about the man's judgment, because he's picked terribly bad woman to have an affair with, if her allegations are correct, because she's gone and told everybody. There's potential clashes with the mayoral code of conduct. Now, they broke up in 2016, but he became a minister in May 2016. Don't know when the breakup happened. Potentially he's broken the ministerial code as well. But do you think, Jason, that people will be concerned about the blackmail? aspects.
Well,
what it shows us about
I think actually Michelle raises the point which I was going to come on to explore a bit more. So first of all, there was an inquiry into the kind of his relationship with Arcuri and the fact that she went on taxpayer-funded trips with him and received £126,000 worth of grants. Now he was cleared by the Independent Office for Police Conduct, but they did make 2 points. They said it would have been wise for him to have declared this relationship, which he failed to do, and they said it breached the Nolan Principles. Now, the Nolan Principles we have to go way back to John Major's day, and do you remember the whole row under John Major's time, kind of, it was kind of back to basics and cash to questions, and Lord Nolan was brought in to kind of examine the ethics of ministerial behaviour, and he came up with these 7 principles of how you should conduct yourself in private life. Now, one of them was ministers or public officials should behave honestly. I'm not entirely sure that Boris Johnson's managed to achieve that throughout his career, but there's definitely a case that in terms of the failure to declare that the propriety of the situation did breach these Nolan Principles. Now, this is primarily what the Greater London Authority, which has still got an ongoing investigation, is going to be looking at. And that's where Arcuri's interview has a lot of public interest, because they've still got a live inquiry. She's given much more detail about the depth of this relationship she had with Boris Johnson, which at first, of course, he tried to brush aside. So they can, as I said, the members of Greater London Authority, there was a possibility, as we report this morning, they could even actually try and summon Boris Johnson to be a witness to this inquiry. That could be interesting. And it could be the case that we suddenly get into the lawyers.
Yeah, now Sarah says, who cares what he does in his personal life? Everyone's entitled to their own story. People have affairs every day. The Prime Minister seems to have them every day. Yes, literally, Sarah. I'm not saying it's right, but at the end of the day, it's his life. You're entirely right. And if he was just having an affair, who cares? But as Jason's just pointed out, there are some other aspects to it. When you're a politician, who you're having an affair with can be an issue. And when you become a minister and the Prime Minister, there are vetting procedures, and the security services become concerned if you're having affairs, because it doesn't matter who it's with. It hasn't got to be a Chinese spy. If it's just a random down the street, it's still an issue, because if someone who is a Chinese spy finds out about it, and for some reason you don't want the world to find out about it, Boris Johnson, despite his reputation, is reluctant to let these kind of affairs become a fact or accepted public fact, then there's potential there for blackmail by foreign states. And you don't want that in a Prime Minister or a Minister or even a Mayor of London. That's why it matters, Sarah. Now, there's also a really interesting bit in here in which Jennifer Arcuri, the tech expert, was warning Boris Johnson, and it's about this in a way, warning him about how he was using insecure communications. He was just texting her and using iMessage and stuff. And she says, someone could hack you, and I don't want this to happen to you. Listen to my technical advice. You need to get Telegram or an encrypted app of some sort. And he just didn't listen and didn't care, and carried on doing it all on open channels, which is another sign of terrible judgment in a politician. But also, even worse judgment, she just got to show it all to a newspaper anyway. So who needs the encrypted app when you've got Jennifer Arcuri? But has it ever happened, Jason, to your knowledge, that a politician who's had an affair has, exposed themselves to something really bad as a result? Or is it just a prurient public interest sort of thing?
I don't know. I'm racking my brains now to think of examples of where, I know there's cases of this happening to officials, where there was a famous case a few years ago of a trip to China by a ministerial delegation where one of the officials was caught in a honey trap, and that was slightly embarrassing. So there is precedent for officials. I can't think off the top of my head. Maybe we just haven't heard about it actually happening with an elected politician. So if
I was the president of China, or indeed Russia, and I was going to be meeting Boris at, say, a G7 or a G8 or some other summit or Davos or something, or even if I wasn't going to be meeting him, or I wanted something out of Boris Johnson, I think I'd throw some women at him. I think I'd have some trained state honey traps, and I would just ping them at him until one of them stuck, because it would, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's been some speculation about kind of, Boris Johnson's usually been quite careful with who he has affairs with.
He picks the quiet ones.
And Arcuri was the one where it didn't go so well. His judgment wasn't so good. But I mean, what kind of comes out of this is, beyond the obviously kind of the need to investigate further whether it was a kind of, impropriety. It's his kind of brazenness, isn't it? It's just that he feels that rules don't really belong to him. That he can, he can get away with anything. And also the other detail I like, which was actually I think was in the first instalment in the Sunday Mirror, is that he's going to, how tight-fisted he is. He asked her for £3.10
on their first date. On their first date. Oh, my goodness. Profumo, Richard says, well, yeah, ministers don't tend to resign over this sort of thing. Prime ministers certainly don't anymore. Not that we've, known about any prime ministerial affairs while they were going on, or fairly recently, because, or while he was prime minister still, because John Major and Edwina Currie is the last one I can think of, and that all came out well after he'd left power. Yeah. So,
and it does depend on, slightly on kind of how kind of puritanical and po-faced you want to be about these things. And I get the point, politicians are entitled to a private life like everybody else. But there's also this argument, which other people put forward, is, that if somebody is kind of, willing to kind of lie to their wife, is willing to break their marriage vows, if they can't, even kind of uphold basic elements of trust within their own family, what are they going to do to the country? Do they have the same attitude? Yeah. And that's where you get this kind of slight crossover between the kind of a personal behaviour and the public behaviour. So, I think none of this is necessarily a shock about how Johnson operates, but it does kind of underline that maybe, that when it comes to kind of personal propriety, he the standards are quite low.
Yeah, Charlotte says, she disagrees with you actually, just shows the lack of integrity in the man. If you cheat and lie in private life, you don't suddenly change your ways for work. But there's a lot of stuff. Keep asking your questions, everybody. Tell us what you think about Boris and Jennifer and whether this matters to you or to the nation at large. But there is some stuff, isn't there, Jason, about, when he was elected, there was lots of talk about this kind of stuff that we already knew about him, because we know, he doesn't have many skeletons in the closet that we know of. His skeletons are all out and about. They've got their own Mardi Gras. They're so far out of the closet. So it's kind of baked in. The voters knew this about Boris when they elected him. And if you don't like Boris to start with, you still don't like him after this because you think he's a liar and a cheat. And if you did like Boris and you did vote for him, you don't care because you voted for Brexit, or you think he's a bit of a lad and it doesn't really matter. So is this going to change? He's not going to resign. It's not going to change any voters' opinions. Of course, he may well have to appear at this inquiry, and that's the thing that it might actually change if he gets... But can he refuse to go?
Well, as I say, this is where we may get into the kind of situation with lawyers, and, and they may fight it every single step of the way. But obviously, if he does refuse to attend, that will only kind of raise speculation that he's got something to hide. So if he thinks, if he has a clear conscience, I don't see why he has any problem attending before the Greater London Authority investigation. Which is kind of
he's no longer married to the woman he cheated on. She's had to wake up to this stuff the last few days and is probably fully aware now, if she wasn't before, what Boris is like. Now, Stephen says his private life should be private until he starts to give taxpayers' money to his mistress. Then it becomes very public. It does seem that she was hotelling and travelling on the London council taxpayers' dime, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we have to be very careful here. I mean, as I say, the investigation by the police that found no evidence of wrongdoing. So we can't state that was necessarily the case. But as I say, there's a second inquiry going on, which is still looking into this. But at the moment, we can't necessarily say there was any connection.
No, and as Mike points out, last time Boris was questioned by them, he genuinely did actually tell them to get stuffed. So he considers the mayoralty well behind him now, beneath him. All this is beneath him. He's never going to address it. He's never going to confess to it. He'll say there are children involved, even though his children are all grown up, and brush it off, and no one's going to perhaps care. But we'll see, won't we, in the fullness of time. I'm sure Jennifer may have other stuff to tell us in the days to come. I doubt she's going to be quiet, that one. Now, we want to get on to speaking about other politicians who aren't doing their job properly. On page 2, there is a much smaller story today about a possible Labour shadow cabinet reshuffle. Now, apparently, even Keir Starmer has now realised that they're not cutting through. It's just on the side there. That way. That's a tiny little bit on the side. A stick, as we call it in the business. Even Keir Starmer's realised they're not cutting through, and something's got to be done. So, Jason, what do we know? Who's for the chop? Who are they exactly, anyway? And who'll replace them? Why do we don't know who they are, isn't it, by definition?
I mean, it names in the article Annalise Dodds, who's the Shadow Chancellor, and Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's the Shadow Home Secretary. I think we should separate them out a bit. I actually don't think Nick Thomas-Symonds is in much danger. I think he's done reasonably well. It's a tough gig. What?
Who is he? None of us have seen him anywhere.
Well,
you know him.
I know him, and I quite rate him. Annalise Dodds there have been kind of some mutterings within in the Labour ranks that she hasn't really found her feet as the role of Shadow Chancellor. She's super bright, multiple degrees, PhDs, knows the subject backwards. But that maybe actually is a problem, that she's kind of more of an academic than she is a politician. She was a former MEP, but she hasn't had much parliamentary experience, i.e. Westminster parliamentary experience. And I think that shows. And kind of perversely, maybe, articles like this, it was first reported in the Sunday Times that she could be in trouble. We'd heard similar things in the Mirror as well. Perversely, it actually may help her, because you don't want to be seen as a leader of a political party kind of bowing to kind of calls in the media to sack somebody. But I would suspect that further down the line, and we may be talking a year now rather than immediately, that Keir Starmer is going to review whether Annalise Dodds is the right person in that job. I think part of the problem is that there's 2 or 3 other politicians in the Labour ranks who've done really well in the recent months. I think Rachel Reeves, for example, the Shadow Cabinet Office Minister, she's been very good on the kind of the COVID contracts, the cronies. She's taken the fight to the Tories on that. She's kind of a more experienced politician, and she's seen as a decent alternative as Shadow Chancellor. A lot of people talking about bringing Yvette Cooper back. She's doing really well as the Home Affairs Select Committee Chairman. Again, experienced Cabinet Minister. She's been seen as somebody who could do it. And possibly Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, who was one of the leadership contenders, who did well in the leadership battle, raised her profile. She's a very good communicator. So you can see why that Keir Starmer is maybe looking at his Shadow Cabinet team and going, look, we need people with perhaps a bit more experience than Annalise Dodds for that role.
Yeah, if I was
other people say, look, she's still, it's less than a year. It's been really difficult because of COVID for anybody in Labour to get a message across. And also, it's not unusual for people not to know the name of a shadow cabinet. It's kind of, beyond the leader, they rarely do know who they are. And most people can't name most of the cabinet either, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you can't have like the equivalent of Piers Morgan being a disruptor going up against a cabinet minister all the time. But I think Boris Johnson's got such a problem with women, both in his personal life and in politics and his cabinet. If I was Keir, I'd get as many women on that front bench as possible, up against the pale, stale men on the other side, making them look bad, and up against Priti Patel, someone who's actually got a soul. I think would compete quite well with her. Now, Keir is the problem, not the shadow cabinet. There's no leadership, and I've no idea what Labour policies are. Too busy fighting the hard left boogeymen that are opposing the Tories. He's totally failed to pin Tory failures onto them, especially I'm afraid it's now 150,000 deaths, roughly, we think, a bit Misha. It's gone up a bit. But Jason, I mean, is it Keir's fault, this? He's still very early in.
I have a lot of sympathy for Keir Starmer on this one. It's been such a difficult road to walk down. On one hand, you want to hold the government to account on the multiple failures on COVID. But the other hand is the public mood has been, we don't want politicians carping, they should be coming together at this time of national crisis. And to get that balance right has been really tough. So if he's kind of overly critical on COVID, they don't like it. The public go, well, why are you being so nasty? This is the government doing its best. But if you're not critical enough, then people are saying, well, you're not being a proper opposition, so you're not going to win. And he's trying to get the balance right. I don't think he's always succeeded, but I can see the dilemma which has faced him. And so I do have some sympathy on that one. On the question of policies which Misha raised, that again is a fair point. I think there's an element here of Labour doing this deliberately, but one of the problems is if you come up with a whole lot of policies now, if they're only good, the government just nick them, and you go into the election and you have nothing new to say. So, but also policy development takes a lot of time, and you've got to get it absolutely right, because otherwise it gets torn to pieces during the election. If you just do things on the back of the fag packet, that shows. So it's a slow process, and they are working on it. And I think you're not going to get back towards the tail end of this parliament. So towards 2022, 2023, then you'll start getting much more Labour policies. Steve
says, Starmer's merely weeping what he's saying. He's a Tory, pure and simple. Okay, Steve. Thanks, Steve. Keep taking the meds, Steve. He is seen as a bit too centrist. We'll give him that. But I've got some sympathy for him as well, both Steve and Jason, because he's got a finite pool of politicians to pick his shadow cabinet from. And of course, it shrunk considerably at the last general election and has been shrinking for a couple of elections now. So it's got fewer and fewer people to actually choose between. He can't find the best, the most brilliant, because he's only got X tiny handful of MPs to choose from. And Michael says, if Keir Starmer loses the next general election or loses his seat, should Keir resign as Labour Party leader?
Well, first of all, he's got one of the safest seats in the country, so it's highly unlikely he'll lose his seat. Will he win the next general election? It's going to be incredibly tough. I mean, you have to remember, Labour had its worst result in 2019 since 1935. Trying to kind of repair that damage in just 4 years and go from that to a majority, it would require an extraordinary swing not seen in since 1945, and is unlikely. It's not impossible, but it's very unlikely. So this is probably more than a 4-year project, restoring Labour's fortunes. If Keir Starmer at the next election can show he can make major gains, I don't think he'll probably resign, because you can see he's making progress. Neil Kinnock, for example, he was Labour leader despite losing the 87 general election. 1987 still went on to fight the 1992 one. So there's precedent there. It's not the end of the world, but you have to show you're making progress.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like you're getting his excuses in early for losing next time.
I'm just being entirely realistic about how big the challenge is of the next general election. I mean, the numbers are against Labour. When you've lost that many MPs, it's really difficult to make that round up in just 4 years.
Of course it is. Now Anthony says, I would agree with her. Keir's ostracised the left, nearly persecuted a large part of his own party. That's very basic, nothing tricky about balance. It was agenda driven. The trouble is, Anthony, that the members of the Labour Party probably aren't in the same way the Conservative membership isn't, representative of the country as a whole. And it's the country as a whole that votes for the Prime Minister. So upsetting your party is one thing and not great, but if you need to do it in order to appeal to the entirety of the country, that's how you get elected. That's how you get prime ministers. And keep asking your questions, everybody. If you want to know what you think about how Keir's doing, please don't be too mad about it. But Jason, one of the things I wanted to say is that although you said, it would take a massive swing, like the style of post-war, the Attlee government, and, a huge landslide that says, the country wants a whole new start. No more Churchill, no more Tories. This is it. We're starting afresh. From here, we need to rebuild our country after the Second World War and build the NHS and the welfare state and everything else. Why can't we have that? Because most people do want, regardless of how they have voted for Brexit or government, most people that I know I've spoken to say they want some good change to come out of COVID. And they want a reassessment of how we work, how we live, where we live, whether we need to commute, you know, all these things. There's a huge appetite. If someone could just inspire them and grab the public mood and say, bang, National Care Service, bang, broadband for everyone, whatever, we can do this now. People would get behind that, wouldn't they? Kid could do it.
I also think people want a bit of stability as well. I know it sounds odd, but we've had an awful lot of change in the last 10 years. We've had kind of, you know, multiple general elections. We've had a very divisive referendum on the EU. We've kind of been through the worst health crisis for more than 100 years. And I think there's an appetite to build a better country. There's also an appetite to build a more stable country. And I think, you know, a quiet life may win.
Yeah, whether we'd get that with Boris Johnson, of course, is another thing coming, Mr. Gold wallpaper coverings. We'll have to see what other ladies come out of the woodwork. Now, we're going to move on to something else. Keep telling us your thoughts about Arcuri or Keir Starmer. We're going to round up some of the questions at the end. But right now, we've got some good news to tell you, take you into the start of the week. Ta-da! It's Freedom Day.
Mini Freedom Day.
Well, after 12 weeks of being locked effectively in our houses because of the weather, we're now being given a slightly bigger cell. That's the freedom that we've got. You can go outside when it's also going to be nice weather this weekend. So you can have a rule of 6 outside, or perhaps 2 households can meet up. Although we still can't go to the hairdressers. You see, look at my fringe. It's actually down to my nose. So we're all should be happy because the weather is kicking in at the same time as we're allowed out and about. Jason, what are you going to be doing this weekend?
The weather's been really annoying because I think it's primarily nice in the south. So you're watching this in the north of England. I apologise, but it's meant to be hitting 22 degrees in London tomorrow, which is just wonderful, and still really hot on Wednesday. And then just as we get to the Easter Bank holiday, it gets cool again, which is really frustrating. So I'm going to be working for the next 3 days, and then just when the weather stops being nice, I'm going to be allowed to go outside. But it is nice to have some freedom, Susie. I can actually go out of my house. I can go beyond the 5 miles of where I live.
Yeah, isn't it a pleasant change? And when it's the nice weather for most of the country, the mood just picks up and everyone feels a little bit more jolly about things. That's probably why it's being trumpeted as Freedom Day in lots of different places in the world.
And it's going to be massive Easter barbecue bonanza, isn't it? I just went to the supermarket weekend and all you could see was piles of charcoal.
That's for the burning steaks that people are going to be strapped to at the weekend. Now, I'll tell you what I'm not doing, and viewers of this show regularly will know, I am not going to be in a caravan in Dorset this weekend, as I should have been, because the lockdown release was coming after a very cheap holiday was supposed to be happening. So that's been put off again for the 3rd year. But everyone's mood is picking up. I'm not going to the hairdressers, as I've said, because they're absolute pits of infection. But I am going to be going for a walk somewhere that I haven't been for a walk recently. That's what I'm doing this weekend, because I'm already in a support bubble. So I'm not seeing any extra family. I'm just seeing the people I already see, going for a walk somewhere slightly different. Why is this a huge deal again, says Susan? Are you talking about the weather or our freedom? I think you're talking about Jennifer Arcuri, because that's what most of our comments appear to be about. To sum up, Susan, it's a huge deal because for some reason she's decided to make it a huge deal again, just as Jason has explained earlier, there is an inquiry going on into his role as mayor. So maybe he'll have to answer some questions about it. Although whether he's ever... Jason, has he ever answered a question about anything?
Well, he's answered lots of questions. Whether he's given any answers is a different question, Susie.
Yes, he's given a reply.
He's very good at talking
in the right order.
Sometimes the words even make sense. He's very good at avoiding questions as well. I've noticed it's kind of something he does that whole Boris waffle thing.
Yes, Jason, do you want to read this one out?
Well, yes, we have reported on that, and we'll keep reporting on it. And it's something which we have not ignored at all. And
no, Hans, I don't know which copy of the Daily Mirror you're reading.
Read the Mirror, and we've done more probably than any other newspaper to focus on the use of food banks, and we've done more reports on the universal credit than almost any other paper as well. So no, Hans, we do this, and yes, we are. As I mentioned earlier, we've done a lot on the cronyism and the COVID contracts, and we'll keep doing it.
Yes, no, the Mirror is the unofficial opposition to the Conservative government at the moment, Hans. So keep buying the Daily Mirror, and you'll find all that stuff. It's in there regularly, trust me. Right, thank you for joining us, Jason.
Nice to see you again, Susie. Enjoy your long weekend in Dorset.
I'm not going to Dorset. I'm not allowed to go to Dorset. Don't bring it up. And we'll see you again on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda, when presumably there may be some more to talk about Boris Johnson and what his trousers have been up to. Bye-bye, everybody. See you later.